There are places that carry an unusual silence. Not the peaceful stillness of a deserted countryside, but a heavy, thick silence, as if the air itself held its breath waiting for something terrible to happen. I went to such a place, not out of curiosity, but out of desperation to escape the constant noise of the city, find a quiet corner to work and let my soul rest. I rented an old farm, isolated among vast fields of weeds, far from the main road and signs of modern life. The main house was made of faded wood and looked tired under the harsh afternoon sun when I first arrived. Surrounding it is a small, rickety warehouse and a dilapidated fence waiting to be repaired. At first glance, it seems like the perfect place to escape, a refuge from the world. But from the first moment I stepped foot on this land, a vague feeling of insecurity crept into me. The silence here does not bring a pleasant feeling. It's too dense, too heavy. There was no bird chirping, no chirping insects, only the sound of the wind occasionally passing through the tall grass, creating a rustling sound that sounded like a mysterious whisper. My skin is cold even though the sun is hot. I told myself that I was just being too sensitive, that I wasn't used to absolute silence after so many years of living in the middle of a bustling city. I tried to get rid of that feeling and start arranging my new life. I chose the living room as a temporary office, placing my desk near the large window overlooking the ancient oak trees standing tall like old sentinels. The scene outside looked peaceful, but I couldn't shake the underlying feeling of tension. The forest at the edge of the property seemed to stand ever vigilantly silent, as if it were watching my every move. The first few days passed relatively peacefully. I walked around the grounds trying to get used to the new environment. But the silence persisted, and a small detail in the house began to attract my attention. The attic door. It's located at the end of a short, narrow hallway, mounted flush to the ceiling. The door looked old, and the strangest thing was that it had been nailed in place from the inside. I remember craning my head and staring at those rusty nails, wondering why anyone would do that. Who would want to seal a space from the inside? When I asked the host about this on my first tour, he just made a dismissive, slightly evasive comment that I'd better leave it alone. "There's nothing of interest up there," he said. "Just leave it as it is." At that time, I shrugged it off, thinking that perhaps the attic had a structural problem, or was simply an old storage place that no one wanted to touch. But the image of nails driven upside down from the inside kept haunting my mind. Then the sounds started. At first, they were very small, only appearing in the middle of the day when I was concentrating on work. A light scratching and rustling sound came from above the ceiling, right in the attic area. It sounded like some tiny claw dragging on wood, or gentle but deliberate footsteps. The first time I heard it, I stiffened. Every hair on my neck stood up. I put my laptop aside, held my breath and listened. Silence for a few seconds. Then there was that rustling sound again, a little clearer. My heart started pounding, my pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to reassure myself. "It's probably just a squirrel," I mumbled. "Or rats. It's an old house." But that explanation didn't reassure me at all, especially when I remembered the door was nailed shut from the inside. If it's just a rodent, why does it have to be sealed so carefully? I called the homeowner, mentioning the noises. His reaction made me even more worried. He kept his evasive tone, repeating over and over that the attic should be left alone, that I should take his word for it. When I tried to ask more, he quickly changed the topic of land tax and hung up. That strange avoidance put a vague fear in my heart. There's something he doesn't want me to know. At night, the silence of the countryside becomes almost absolute, only occasionally broken by the sound of the wind whistling through the door or the crackle of the house's wood expanding. And it was in that silence that the sounds from the attic became clearer and scarier. I lay on the bed, my eyes wide open, looking up at the dark ceiling, listening to the scratching and dragging sounds that seemed right above my head. My chest tightened, cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I felt like something was moving, existing right above, trapped in that dark space. Sleep becomes a luxury. I tossed and turned, struggling with the bed sheets wrapped around my ankles, my mind constantly imagining what could be making that noise. Many nights in a row, I woke up feeling exhausted and my nerves were tight as strings. The lack of sleep began to affect my work and mood. I became irritable and easily startled. One particularly bad night, after being awakened by a rustling sound that seemed more persistent and purposeful, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up from bed, turned on the hallway light switch, determined to find the source of the noise. Maybe if I suddenly check, I'll find a weasel or raccoon crawling through a hole somewhere, I told myself, hoping for a reasonable explanation. But as soon as I entered the hallway, the overhead light suddenly went out, leaving only a weak halo of light, and then went out, plunging me into almost complete darkness. My heart seemed to stop beating for a beat. My back is cold. I took a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was just a burned-out light bulb. But in the next moment, a strange light appeared. A pale light danced faintly on the walls at the end of the hallway, accompanied by a distinctive, unmistakable scent, the smell of burning candle wax. I stood frozen in place, my breathing shallow and rapid. The light was dim, flickering just like candlelight, but there was no candle there at all. For a moment of terror, I was convinced that I was about to see a figure standing at the end of the hallway. An internal struggle takes place. Run away to your room or go forward and face it. In the end, a morbid curiosity mixed with reckless courage won out. I slowly moved forward, my footsteps light on the old wooden floor. But before I could take a few steps, the strange light disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the hallway in darkness and heavy silence. My heart was beating so hard that my legs were shaking. I had to hold on to the wall to keep my balance. When I reached the end of the hallway, I found nothing, only the sound of my own frantic, panting breathing echoing in the empty space. The next morning, I woke up feeling extremely tired and confused. What is that candle light? Where does that smell of burning wax come from? This house has electricity. Had I really started hallucinating from lack of sleep? But my intuition told me that what I was experiencing was real. The smell of burning wax still seemed to linger somewhere in the air, a haunting sign of last night's strange presence. I decided to go outside and get some fresh air, hoping the daylight would dispel my irrational fears. Under the bright sunlight, the farm looked strangely normal and peaceful. I almost laughed at my panic last night, but the feeling of peace of mind did not last long. As I walked toward the old barn in the far corner of the lot, the unmistakable feeling that I was being watched came back. My entire spine felt like electricity was running through me. My scalp was tingling, although I tried to look around, scanning the trees, the weedy fields, even the silent windows of the house. I didn't see anyone or anything, but my instincts were screaming that I was not alone. Something is following my every step, hidden somewhere in this silence. I entered the barn, hoping to find some tool to repair the fence, but my attention was immediately drawn to the interior walls. All over the old wooden surfaces were strange markings, looking like hastily carved or scribbled symbols. Some are triangles intersected by jagged lines, others are spirals with small crosses at their centers. They look ancient and have a mysterious, almost voodoo look to them. I stood there stunned, looking at them. A chill ran down my arm. My mouth is dry. Are these signs of protection, as people do against evil spirits? Or, on the contrary, are they used to summon, to imprison something? My imagination began to run wild with the darkest possibilities. Could these symbols have anything to do with the noises in the attic, with the door being nailed shut from the inside? I pulled out my phone and took a few quick photos, as a way to confirm that I hadn't imagined them. Day gradually turned to night, and my tension increased. I can't concentrate on work anymore. Instead of drafting reports or answering emails, I found myself standing in the hallway, my ears pricked up, listening for every little noise from above. At dinner time, the images of the symbols in the barn kept coming to mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow connected to the noises in the attic. My appetite disappeared completely. Food becomes tasteless like mush in the mouth. Sleep is now a battle I always lose, replaced by a dull, nagging fear that wraps around me like an invisible shroud. During those tense days, an object I brought with me from the city, something seemingly harmless, began to attract my attention in a disturbing way. It's a painting I bought at a local art fair a few weeks before moving here. At that time, I was simply browsing through the stalls, with no particular intention of buying anything. But then I saw it, a strange night landscape painting. It depicts a still lake reflecting a crescent moon, and on the shore of the lake is a small, lonely wooden house, illuminated only by the weak light emanating from a single window. The rest of the house was in dense darkness. The moonlight was just enough to dimly reveal the outlines of the trees behind, and the lake water looked cold, black as polished obsidian. What fascinated me was not only the skillful drawing technique, but also the terrifying sense of realism emanating from the painting. Even the stillness and gloom it depicts seems tangible, as if I look long enough, my vision can slip into that inner world, across some invisible threshold. The artist, a tall, thin man with tired eyes, was standing next to me at that moment. He said he drew this scene from recurring dreams that had haunted him for years. He claims that each time he tries to capture every detail, the dream changes slightly, preventing him from ever drawing it completely accurately. He seemed strangely relieved to have finally sold it, and even said something strange. Hope it gives you insight or perhaps liberation. At that time, I just thought it was the odd words of an eccentric artist, a unique sales tactic. I had no doubts, nor did I have any inkling of the terrible things that were about to happen. I hung the painting in the living room of the farmhouse, on the wall opposite the window, where it caught some natural daylight. In the evening, the yellow light in the room gives the painting a soft glow, almost like real moonlight in that scene. The first night after arriving at the farm, I didn't pay much attention to the painting. But the second night, after experiencing strange noises from the attic, I started having dreams. I dreamed that I was standing by the lake in the painting, looking towards that lonely wooden house. Everything was exactly like in the picture, except that in the dream, I could feel the movement inside the house. It was as if someone or something was walking back and forth in front of the only lit window, causing the light inside to occasionally flicker and flicker. I woke up, sweating profusely, my heart beating wildly. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just the power of suggestion after looking at the picture too much. But every time I tried to go back to sleep, I felt like there was an invisible weight on me, as if some eyes were watching me right in my own bedroom. The third night, the dream about the wooden house became more vivid than ever. I could have sworn I smelled the dampness of the lakeside soil and felt the cold wind rushing through the tall grass. The silence surrounding that place was so deep that it almost rang in my ears. And then, something began to stir in the darkness behind me. I never saw it clearly, only sensed a lurking presence, watching me from under the shade of a tree. A subtle movement of air, an unusual rustling of leaves. My skin felt like pins and needles in the dream, and that feeling was still there when I woke up, scared. I don't know what's happening to me anymore. Every morning when I wake up, my muscles ache with dull pain as if I had struggled all night in a tense state of fear. Everything in this house seems to be against me. The noises in the attic, the feeling of being watched, and now the haunting dreams from the painting. One evening, an old friend from the city visited me without warning. He was also present at the art fair the day I bought the painting. He complimented my choice, calling the painting haunting yet mesmerizing. However, after sitting around for a while, he looked at the painting with a slight frown. "Hey," he said, "it looks a little different from what I saw at the fair, doesn't it? I suppose maybe the lighting in my living room makes it look different." But he insisted, "No, I mean the house. It looks a little bigger and more central in the frame." I politely brushed it off, thinking he was just imagining things or his memory was a bit confused. But after he left, I couldn't help but stop and look closely at the painting. The thought that it might have changed without me noticing made my scalp tingle. I tried to compare it with the image in my memory. I swear it's still the same, although I have to admit that measuring the proportions of a drawn house with the naked eye is kind of silly. However, a seed of doubt was planted in my heart. I decided to go to bed early that night, trying to get rid of all my wandering thoughts. But as soon as I turned off the living room lights, an ominous silence fell over the apartment. This silence seems to be especially concentrated around the area where the painting hangs. My cat, Mittens, a normally affectionate creature who likes to lounge on the sofa, that night refused to enter the living room. It just stood in the hallway doorway, the hairs on the back of its neck standing up, its big round eyes staring at the painting as if waiting for it to move. I tried to lure it in, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, it began to growl, a deep, throaty, menacing growl that I had never heard from it before. It was a primal sound, a clear warning. My arms got goosebumps. Finally, I gave up, left Mittens standing guard in the doorway, and went to sleep. That night, the nightmares returned with more intensity than ever. This time, I didn't just stand and look at the wooden house from afar. I felt myself being pulled closer by an invisible force, forced to step onto its rickety porch in my dream. My heart was pounding as if it were about to burst my chest. Cold sweat trickled down my temples. I clearly heard my own gasps, but I still couldn't stop. The closer we got, the heavier the air became, and a foul, rotten smell began to rise from the porch. The wooden planks creaked under my feet. The weak light from that single window now seemed to vibrate and invite. I never had the courage to open that door. Instead, I just stood there, paralyzed with fear, listening to the sound of something moving, waiting inside. My mouth was dry, my throat burned with each shallow breath. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. When I woke with a start, I gasped, and for a terrifying moment, I believed I could still smell the faint scent of damp earth and rotting wood right in my bedroom. That morning, I didn't even dare look directly at the painting. An almost tangible fear radiated from it, as if the canvas itself was emitting some dark energy. Mittens still appeared uneasy, hissing every time he passed the living room entrance and refusing to set foot on the carpet in front of the picture wall. And then, I noticed it more clearly. The painting really looks more alive. The shadows around the trees deepened, the moon's reflection on the water became sharper, and the wooden house, there's no doubt about it anymore. It certainly looked larger than I remembered, as if it had slowly creeped closer within its own setting. Or is my mind actually playing cruel tricks on me? The strangest and scariest thing is still the growing feeling of being watched. Whether I was in the kitchen, the hallway, or even the bedroom, I constantly felt the weight of an invisible gaze pressing down on me. This feeling was strongest when I was in the living room, near the painting, where the atmosphere always seemed thick, almost oppressive. I tried to convince myself that it was all psychological, caused by stress and lack of sleep. But every time I entered that room, my breathing became rapid, and a drop of cold sweat rolled down my spine. One night, while I was trying to fall into a light sleep, another sudden noise woke me up. This time, it wasn't a scratching sound from the attic. It was like a low groan, echoing vaguely through the walls of the house. The sound was so faint that at first I wasn't sure if I could actually hear it. But my heart started pounding like a drum. Mittens, huddled at the foot of my bed, also jumped up, hissing into the darkness, refusing to move from his position near the bedroom door. I turned on the light, my heart beating wildly in my chest. I looked around the living room. Everything seems normal, but then my eyes stopped at the painting, the only window in the wooden house. The light emanating from it seemed even brighter than the night before, almost ghostly brilliant. I stood there, sweat soaking my t-shirt and sticking to my back, trying to tell myself that paintings can't change the light on their own. It was just an illusion, that's for sure. The next day, I confided to a colleague on the phone about how I hadn't slept well for many days. I described the painting vaguely, not daring to openly express my suspicion that it was changing, for fear of being thought crazy. My colleague, as I expected, assumed I was stressed or facing unresolved concerns. That explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but it did nothing to alleviate the ominous atmosphere that permeated my home and my life. In the following days, small but strange events kept piling up. I found muddy footprints near the back door of the house, even though I was sure I hadn't gone out in the rain and there was no one else here. Mitten's water bowl inexplicably spilled over several times when it was not nearby. The temperature in the living room is always significantly colder than the rest of the house, even though the thermostat is set at a steady level. And of course, the noises in the attic continued, sometimes sounding more like heavier footsteps, no longer the scratching sounds of small animals. The nightmares about the cabin by the lake are also becoming more and more daring. In the dream, I was not only pulled to the porch, but also felt forced to go around the back of the house. The moonlight there seemed weak and obscured, an oppressive darkness clinging to the rotting wooden walls. I could clearly sense a presence lurking just outside my sight, a shadowy figure in the darkness, moving with unbelievable silence. Every time that happens, I wake up startled, my heart pounding in extreme terror. Part of me wanted to throw the painting away immediately. I even lifted it off the wall again. But as soon as I touched the canvas, the familiar feeling of nausea and dizziness came back, even stronger than before. My stomach turned, and I had to hold on to the wall to keep from falling. I hastily put the painting back in its place, panting, my blood vessels pounding in my throat. The fear was so intense that I felt as if the painting itself was fighting against me, warning me to keep it in place. I told myself I was imagining it, but the raw terror coursing through my veins was undeniable. Mittens became increasingly distraught. He started avoiding me completely, just hiding under the bed all day and only daring to come out when I was fast asleep. The once affectionate cat now looked at me with wide, wary eyes, as if I had become part of the danger that surrounded this house. Its alienation made me even more lonely and afraid. I started turning on the TV or radio all day long at home, just to fill the silence that seemed to vibrate menacingly, especially in the living room. But that artificial noise only accentuated the emptiness, the invisible presence lurking just beyond my sensory threshold. It's like a weak, makeshift barrier against something that's slowly encroaching. The tension finally reached a boiling point one Sunday night. I spent most of the day trying to distract myself with errands and lounging at the nearest coffee shop in town. But fear gnawed in my stomach the entire time. As night fell, I returned to the farm, and an almost irresistible pull pulled me toward the painting. An almost feverish urge to test it, to confront it. My throat was dry, and a chill radiated from deep within my soul. I turned on all the lights in the living room, determined not to cower in the dark again. I walked in front of the painting, and this time there was no doubt. The details have indeed changed. The tree line on the left side of the picture seems to have thinned out, revealing a small trail that I'm sure didn't exist before. The wooden house itself looks looming larger, almost occupying the center of the scene. And that single window, not only was it brighter, it was now burning with a brilliant, ghostly, almost hypnotic light. As I stood there, eyes fixed on the painting, an inexplicable whisper passed through my ears. It may be just the sound of the wind outside the window, but it felt scary, as if someone was standing right behind me, breathing slightly into my neck. My heart pounded into my chest as if to break. I turned around suddenly, my fist tightened, ready to face an invasion. But no one, only the empty atmosphere and the heavy silence of the room welcomed me. However, the feeling of being monitored is still there, persistent and more intense than ever. I want to scream just to break this suffocating tension. Instead, I swallowed, trying to keep calm. At that moment, the light on the highlight flashed. Once, twice, then turn off. My mouth is bitter. I unconsciously put my hand towards the light switch on the wall. The light of the light again. But in the half-second moment in that darkness, I had a horrific impression. A firmness that the wooden house in the picture was not just an image. It is an open way. I swear that I had seen the movement inside that window. A silhouette passing. Something on the other side was looking back at me. The lights are stable again. The picture looks a bit more normal, except for the cold, obsessive light still emanating from the window. That is the final limit. I could not stand another night of insomnia, could not face any more nightmares. I also could not live in the permanent fear of the noises on the attic or the feeling of being watched. My only option is to face anything happening in this house, starting from the picture. I lifted the picture from the wall again. The feeling of dizziness and nausea came again, but this time I gritted my teeth, gripped the picture frame, determined not to let the fear overwhelm. I brought it to the middle of the living room. Mittens hissed again from the corridor, not daring to approach. My body trembled. Sweating made my forehead soaked, Even my vision was slightly shaking as if I was about to faint. I put the picture on a low table and took the flashlight from the drawer. The highlight of the highlight sometimes flickers, increasing the feeling of heavy ominousness. My breath was shallow and folded, hissing through the teeth clenched. Under the flashlight, I meticulously checked each inch of the picture. The complex brush stroke, the texture of the rough oil paint under the fingers. But when I touched, I felt a strange vibration running along the cloth, almost unexpected. The hair on my arms stood up again. It is like a voic sound at extremely low frequency, an energy hidden from the picture itself. In my mind, echoing the artist's words. The dreams repeated. Unable to grasp them completely, they always change. Hope it gives you liberation. Did he accidentally release something when he tried to redraw his dream on this cloth? An entity, a scary power, has been imprisoned in the picture, and is now trying to escape or growing up thanks to my attention. Fear? It wants to be noticed, need to be studied. It is pulling me closer, like a dream wooden house that pulled me on its porch. To fight the wave of panic rising in my chest, I did a surprise. I faced the picture on the table. I stood there, holding my breath and waited, as if I was waiting for a reaction from it. The house was deadly silent, leaving only my own pounding heart and pounding in my chest. My chest tightened, and a dizziness made me cling to the edge of the table to keep balance. Then I heard it. The sound of the floor creaked. A sound cannot happen, because I am standing on the tiled floor of the living room. The noise came from the dark corridor. I jerked my head to that side, pointing the flashlight like a weapon. Adrenaline pumped in the blood vessels. Nothing there, just darkness and silence. But I could not shake off the feeling that something had just entered the room, just walked through the corridor in the moment when I faced down the picture. In a second, the thought of fleeing from his own house leased it. But a strange determination, almost reckless, filled with me. This is my space. I refuse to deliver it to an illusion, an object that is haunted, or any name that one can give this horror. Gathering a little bit of courage left, I lifted the picture out of the table and leaned on the wall, face facing out, placed straight to the floor. I stood facing it, looking directly at the image of a wooden house and a spooky lake, refusing to take my eyes. My eyes were spicy because of stress. My hands trembled non-stop, and cold sweat wet behind the back of the neck. But I won't let my fear dominate myself anymore. I will face it. I thought that, in an extremely short moment, I saw the light in the window of the wooden house in a flickering picture, like a candle that was fading. And at that moment, a firmness to the invading my mind. If I surrendered this horrifying, if I turned away, if I ran away, then hiding in that wooden house would become stronger. It will win. So, instead, I forced myself to continue staring at it. I whispered, repeated in my mind, even though the silent voice of reason was trembling. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. Although my heart was beating in my chest, I betrayed it. After what seemed endlessly, a subtle change took place. The air pressure in the room seemed to be slightly less, as if a heavy presence had retreated. My breath became easier. My vision stopped reeling. I listened to any cramps or moans, but only heard the familiar whisper of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of the wind outside. Finally, I realized that Mittens had been carefully approached, even though it still bent down to the doorway, the ears up, vigilant from me to the picture and then looking at me. That night, I still did not sleep well. But for the first time after many days, I did not dream about the wooden house by the lake anymore. The next morning, when the sun got up, I carefully observed the picture. It looks less lively, less scary. The small trail behind the row of trees has disappeared, replaced by a piece of dense leaves. The only window has returned with dim light, weak initially. The silent tension in the house was not completely disappeared, but it seemed to be backward, only a weak beat, far away in my subconscious. I will not pretend everything back to normal after that night. Occasionally, I still feel heavy pressure in the living room, as if something was still hiding, waiting right outside the eye. Mittens is still alert, and sometimes, if I lingered my eyes for too long, I still saw small and sophisticated changes in the details. But at least, I could breathe a little easier, and those cold nightmares were paused. I still haven't found enough courage to throw away the picture. Part of me fear that removing it can release something worse. Another part, to be honest, it is impossible to shake off a distorted curiosity. As if I and the picture, or something inside it, was bound to each other in a grim treaty, a silent ceasefire agreement signed by the moment I stared at its darkness and did not collapse. So I hold it back, always aware of its presence, always the mind that those dark dreams can come back at any time. But the confrontation with the picture seems to be part of the story. The insecurity in this house is not limited to four walls. It started spread out. In the following days, although no longer tormented by nightmares from the picture, the feeling of being watched when I was outdoors became stronger, especially in the late afternoon, when the sunset began to fall and the darkness from the edge of the land began to spread. I started to turn on all the lights in the house as soon as the twilight sky, sitting in the living room, hugging my knees, trying to focus on the surrounding ceiling details. The sound of the clock on the wall, the cry of the refrigerator in the kitchen, whatever could hold me in the real world. But part of me felt like I was in another nightmare. A nightmare refused to let go. Living in permanent fear has become unbearable. My appetite disappeared again. My eyes were spicy because of constant sleep. My nerves were so tense that it was unbearable. Any noise, even the smallest, made me startled. I decided that I could not live like this forever. I faced the picture. Now I need to face anything lurking me outside. One late afternoon, when the sun began to set under the horizon, dyed the sky with orange and purple streaks, I stood in the backyard. My hand gripped a large light flashlight. My palm was so sweaty that I had to wipe them on the jeans. My heart rate beat fast and strong, my breathing and shallow. I told myself that if I saw it again, the shadow that I saw sometimes glimpsed at the edge of my eyes, the feeling of being intense watching, I would not run away. I will not let fear control my actions. I will stand firm. I stood there, feeling like hours passed, although the reality was probably only a few dozen minutes. I swept a flashlight around the house, shone into the rickety fence, on the faded wooden walls, crossing the overgrown wild bushes. The backyard gradually sinks into the deeper gray shades. My throat was dry. My chest tightened after every minute passed in the tension. The light sensor light attached to the back door is still silent. The silence was almost absolute, only broken by the sound of leaves rustling weak in timid breeze. As soon as I tried to tell myself that nothing would happen tonight, that I was probably just scaring myself, the light sensor light suddenly flashed, illuminating a far corner of the backyard. And there is it again, the shadow. It is tall, vague shape like people, but it is not clear, as if woven from the darkness. It is not clearly separated from any object or tree around, but like a distorted space, a more dense presence than the night. My heart beat so hard that I thought I could faint. But this time I forced my feet to move. I walked forward, towards the shadow. That presence seemed to shake itself, slightly moving as if it had difficulty maintaining its shape under a direct look. My breath turned out into sporadic, gasping, and my muscles trembling in slow steps. A fierce urge wanted to turn around and run water into the house, locked the door tightly, fled under the bed. But I continued to step, 5 steps, then 6 steps, until I was only a few meters away. Suddenly, the light sensor light turned off, engulfed me into the darkness almost completely. I stood there, trembling, clearly feeling each hair on my arm, and the back of the neck stood up. I groped on the flashlight switch, but the strong beam seemed helpless, unable to penetrate the stifling darkness, especially around me. I felt that it was very close, just a few meters away. A change in the air, a weak whisper of movement on my left side. My mouth was dry. My heart beat an erratic drum, missed the beat. I scanned the flashlight in that direction, and I swear, in a short moment, I saw a tall figure leaning forward, as if I was curious to observe me. Certainly not humans, at least not in any sense that I understand. Its shape looks like a human, but it blinks and distorted, like a faulty projection, a shadow struggling to maintain its shape. A small sound, at a very low frequency, filled my ears, or maybe it was just the sound of blood rushing to my brain in that extreme intense moment. I realized that I was being cornered in my own backyard, facing myself that I was terrified for so long. I gripped the flashlight even more, as if it was my only weapon, reminding myself not to close my eyes, not to surrender to the panic waiting to swallow myself. I was sure to stand there for about 10 seconds, in a silent confrontation state, all muscles stretched to the point of throbbing, sweat flowing into the line along the spine. Then a bizarre feeling spread throughout me, like a refrigerated current washed through the flesh. My flashlight blinked again, and when the light stabilized, that shape disappeared. The backyard suddenly felt incredible emptiness. Nothing left, besides the breathing, trembling myself echoed in the dark night. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the armchair in the living room. My eyes looked out the dark window, recalling the confrontation in my mind from time to time. I did not feel victory because I had faced it. I just felt a more painful, deeper than ever. It did not harm me. It is simply observing, as if it is evaluating, deciding how to react. Even when I remembered that memory now, my heart still tightened and his breath became difficult. I took a break from work for a few days, telling people that I was solving some personal problems. It is not really a lie. This house now has a different feeling, as if it had absorbed my anxiety and fear into its walls. Every time I walked out of the yard, the memory of that flashing silhouette came. I still occasionally saw strange movements near the rear fence, at the edge of my eyes, but I no longer dared to go out after the sun set. I no longer water plants at night. I stay away from that area. That presence is still hidden here. Something always alert, always at the edge of my vision, reminding me that I have never been really lonely in this house. But I refuse to move. Maybe I'm clinging to the thought that this is still my home, and I will not be chased by the fear. Or perhaps, more realistic, I was too paralyzed before the prospect of moving the place again, to disturb my life again. Despite all, every night when I pulled the window blinds, I felt a cold-hearted feeling running along my spine. And I'm sure it's still out there, in the darkness, maybe waiting for me to wade, waiting for me to be vigilant. Sometimes I doubt my own alertness. Am I gradually collapsing, creating these horrors myself? But every time the sensor light automatically turned on without a clear reason, whenever I felt that invisible air movement behind my neck, I remembered that my fear was not unfounded. I have never seen the image of that shadow as clearly like that confrontation, but I still feel it. Even now, when I sat here to rewrite these lines, I could feel it. There was a corner in my backyard that seemed to be in the darkness, no matter how many lights I installed or I trimmed trees carefully. When I looked in that direction, the hair on my arm stood up, and I felt like something was looking back at me, curious and extremely insecure. Occasionally late at night, I heard the weak sound near the back wall of the house, like an invited guest who was trying to remind me of its persistent presence. It never became a direct threat, but it was still a hidden threat, a silent reminder that the barrier between me and it, between the real world and the dark world, really fragile. I doubt that, over time, or I will learn to live with this, with the noise on the attic, with a spooky picture, with the shadow in the yard, or I will completely fall under the pressure of stress and fear. The tightness in my chest has not been relieved since I first felt something wrong in this place. I constantly felt it, like a worried knot rolling tightly behind my ribs. Even now, my palm is still sweating when I remembered, and my breath became shallow. The last question left, the persistent question I persist is, will these entities really exist outside, which are certain supernatural intrusion? Or are they just an extension of the mind that is gradually clearing and collapsing of myself? Or worse, are both? An ability to bring a unique horror of its own. Currently, I am still here, in this old farm, with a picture hanging on the wall. The attic door is still crucified, and the large backyard contains dark secrets. I still look out the window more often than I want to admit, half hope to see something to confirm my fear, half hope it is forever just a hidden ghost. But sometimes my peripheral vision will catch up with a small change in the darkness out there, and a chill run along my spine. I have no specific evidence to show it to others, only certainty, heavy in my heart that it is real enough to make me never feel safe again. And when people asked me how these days, I could only have a wry, strange smile and said that I was trying to overcome. Because even when I tried to push those thoughts away, I knew I would never be able to really escape from silent observers, invisible and tangible entities with me sharing the space in this remote house. The truth is, maybe I will never be really lonely again. And that is the most frightening thing. There are places, ladies and gentlemen, that seem to exist solely to harbor fear. Not the kind of fleeting, startling fear, but the kind of dull fear that creeps into every fiber of your body, takes root in your mind, and slowly tightens. The story I'm about to tell is about such a place and about a man, his name is Alex, who accidentally entered its vortex, and perhaps never really got out. It all started when Alex found a house to rent in a remote suburb. He needed a quiet space to focus on his writing work, and the old wooden house, nestled between rows of ancient oak trees, separate from the noise of the city, seemed to be a perfect choice. The house has an ancient, slightly sad look, with peeling paint and windows overlooking a wild garden. From the first time he stepped through the threshold, Alex felt an unusual stillness, a heavy, almost waiting stillness. The air inside smelled of damp wood, dust and something faint, unnameable, like old forgotten memories. The homeowner, a seemingly austere middle-aged man, only exchanged a few short sentences, gave Alex a rusty key and reminded him of a few basic things. When Alex asked about the attic with the door that looked like it was permanently nailed down at the end of the upstairs hallway, the homeowner just brushed it off. "Oh, there's nothing up there," he said, his voice a little unnatural. "It's just an old warehouse. It's best to leave it alone." Those words, although normal, planted a vague seed of curiosity and insecurity in Alex's heart, but he quickly dismissed it. He needed quiet, and this house, although a bit odd, seemed to provide it. The first few days passed relatively peacefully. Alex arranged the furniture and set up a working corner in a small room overlooking the garden. He enjoyed the silence, the distant sounds of birds singing and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Sometimes he felt like someone was looking at him from the edge of the forest, or a cold feeling ran down his spine when passing through the hallway at night, but he told himself it was just because he was not used to the new space with the absolute solitude of this place. The real change began one weekend afternoon, when Alex wandered a small nearby town and stumbled into an antique store. The place was exactly as one would imagine. Cramped, dusty, littered with items from the past, stopped grandfather clocks, lifeless porcelain dolls, tattered leather books and faded picture frames. The smell of mold, old paper and furniture wax mixed together, so strong it stung the nose. The old shop owner, sitting hidden behind a pile of old newspapers, just nodded to Alex indifferently, seemingly used to customers who were just curious to look rather than actually wanting to buy. Alex glided through the narrow passages, his eyes stopping here and there, until he caught sight of it, a small portrait, leaning against a dusty wall. It depicts a middle-aged man, wearing a dark suit, with a stern, almost austere expression. The drawing is strangely realistic, but what really holds Alex's eyes are the eyes of the man in the painting. They were deep, black, and stared straight at him with an intensity, as if penetrating through old oil paint. A prickly feeling ran down Alex's spine. His heart skipped a beat. He felt like he was being pinned in place by that look. The man's hair is neatly combed. His posture is stiff, and the background is just a swirl of dark browns and blacks, highlighting his figure vividly. Whether Alex moved left or right, those eyes seemed to still follow, never leaving. He dismissed the unpleasant feeling, thinking it was just the effect of a skillfully crafted work of art. He asked the shop owner about the painting. The old man shrugged, saying it came with a batch of furniture from a certain estate, with no signature, no date, nothing to identify the artist or the painted person. "Probably early 20th century, he muttered. But who knows for sure? Despite a brief hesitation, Alex still decided to buy the painting. He thinks it will add a classic, intellectual highlight to his office. He paid a small sum, and as he carried the heavy wooden frame out of the store, he had the strange feeling that the man's penetrating gaze was drilling into his flesh, even through the thick canvas. Upon arriving home, Alex immediately hung the portrait on the wall opposite his desk in the office. The room is quite small, with only one window, usually bathed in soft daylight. He looked at it, trying to convince himself that the stern expression was just the product of an old art style. But a vague tension kept creeping into his mind every time his eyes accidentally touched the eyes on the painting. At first, the discomfort is just slight ripples. When he's focused on his computer or book, Alex often feels the urge to glance over his shoulder. Of course, the man in the painting never changed position, but those steady eyes made him feel exposed, as if his every thought, every movement was being silently observed. His heart beat a little faster. His breathing became shallower. Soon he found himself trying to avoid looking directly at the portrait. He explained to himself that it was just a psychological effect due to the realism of the painting and the lonely silence of the house. But then, things started to become clearer. One night, around 3 a.m., Alex woke up because his throat was dry. He groped downstairs to get water. The house was in deep darkness. The hallway was only dimly lit by the streetlight shining through the living room window. As he passed by the slightly open office door, he tried not to look inside, but some invisible force made him squint. His heart seemed to stop beating. In a terrifying moment, he clearly saw a dark figure sitting in his office chair, with his back to the door. A cold rush of adrenaline ran down my spine. He fumbled to find the hallway light switch. White light turned on, filling the space. The chair is empty. The painting still hung on the wall. The man in it seemed even darker and scarier under the ceiling light. But the image of that shadow sitting there, in a place where it had no right to exist, was engraved in Alex's mind. That night, he could hardly sleep. Lying in bed, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was standing in the corner of the bedroom, silently observing him in the dark. Cold sweat broke out, and the pounding of his heart in his ears seemed to drown out all other sounds. The next morning, tired and stressed, Alex decided to close the office door after finishing work. He told himself it was to keep the room tidy, but deep inside, he knew he wanted to create a barrier, however thin, between himself and that restless gaze. But that barrier seems to have no effect. Strange phenomena began to increase. When he sat working late, he often heard faint noises behind him, light rustling, sounds like someone walking on a wooden floor, the sound of fabric rubbing against each other. Each time, his chest tightened, a hot wave of panic rising up his neck. He spun around suddenly, his heart racing, only to find the room empty and quiet. Only the painting was still there. The man's eyes looked straight at him, expressionless and full of scrutiny. He started trying to move the painting. He hung it on another wall, then placed it on a bookshelf, even leaning it against a hidden corner behind a filing cabinet. But no matter where they were, those eyes seemed to find him, still watching with the same haunting intensity. He feels that the atmosphere in the house is increasingly stuffy, especially in the office. Sometimes he smelled a faint, strange scent, like old, musty perfume, a scent that did not belong to this house, nor did it belong to him. At the same time, Alex's attention was drawn towards the mysterious attic. One evening, while walking along the upstairs hallway, he suddenly stopped. A sudden chill ran down my spine, stronger than any before. He raised his head and looked towards the nailed attic door. And then he saw it, a faint, dancing light, shining from small cracks around the edge of the door. The light was unstable. It shook erratically, as if someone was holding a candle and moving it in a slow circle inside. A wave of terror nearly caused Alex to lose his balance. Instinct screamed at him to run, but a morbid curiosity, a ghostly attraction, held him back. He slowly approached, coming to a position right below the door. The light was still dancing on the ceiling above him. Then suddenly, it was gone, flashing out through the cracks, plunging the hallway into complete darkness once more. Alex's body stiffened. Just then, he felt it, an invisible pressure in the air, a heavy, dense presence, as if some entity was standing just inches from his face. His skin felt like it had thousands of needles pricking from head to toe. His mouth suddenly went dry, his throat tightened, making it impossible for him to swallow. He groped around, almost tripping, his limbs shaking uncontrollably, and rushed toward the stairs and down to the kitchen. He struggled to find the flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the darkness, revealing dust particles dancing in the air like tiny ghosts. He swept his flashlight along the quiet hallway, half expecting, half terrified to see a shape in the dark corner, but there was nothing. There was only heavy silence and the lingering feeling of being watched. That night, the power did not come back on until early morning. Alex sat huddled on the sofa the entire time, clutching his knees, startled by every slightest noise, the creak of the house, the sound of wind whistling through the door. The next day, with daylight dispelling some of his fears, Alex decided to find out more. He remembered the strange markings he had glimpsed in the warehouse a few days earlier, scribbled carvings on an old wooden plank. He planned to take pictures of them to look them up online to see if they had any meaning. He trudged out to the warehouse, hoping the sunlight would help him see better. But when the warehouse door creaked open, Alex's heart almost stopped. New signs have appeared. They were fresher, carved deeper into the wood in shaky lines, as if created hastily and obsessively. They look like variations of the old symbols, but more chaotic and erratic. Alex's legs became weak. A hot feeling of fear rose to his face. And then, he saw it, the flashlight he used last night, the flashlight he was sure had left on the kitchen table, now lying neatly on the old workbench in the corner of the warehouse. He reached out to pick it up, but his hand shook so much that it clattered to the floor. His sanity began to waver. Are you losing your mind? Did you put the flashlight there without remembering? Or worse, did he carve those symbols himself while sleepwalking? The thought sent chills down his spine. His sleep had been fitful lately, full of nightmares, dreams of dark hallways, of the haunting eyes in the portrait, of the feeling of a dark shadow pressing down on him. Could paranoia cause a strange form of sleepwalking? But the thought that something else is roaming his grounds, leaving sinister messages in mysterious symbols, is equally horrifying. At the same time, messages started appearing. It happened the other night, also around 3 a.m. Alex's phone, placed on the nightstand, suddenly lit up, pulling him out of a light, dreamy sleep. The room was so silent that even his own breathing sounded loud and panicked. His hands were shaking as he picked up the phone. The sender is listed as unknown. No number, no name, just a single line of text. The message read, "Left hand on blanket, elbow slightly bent, head tilted to the right on the pillow." Alex's stomach tightened. That was exactly his position at that time. Every little detail. It was as if someone were right there in the room, watching him with unwavering attention. He sat up, the blanket wrapped around him, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Every dancing shadow, every creaking sound of the house is like a threat. There was no one there. He locked the phone, turned it face down, trying to convince himself that this was just a cruel joke, a strange coincidence. But the messages didn't stop. Night after night, always at that spooky time, they come again. Initially, they simply described his position, his actions in the apartment. But then they get scarier. One night, the text message read, "Thinking about the antique store. That look." Alex was cold. That was exactly what he was thinking about at that moment, the obsession with the portrait. Another time, the message quoted a phrase he had just whispered in his head, a private fear he had never expressed. Real fear welled up in him. Breathing becomes rapid. Heart beats violently as if it would burst out of the chest. Every time the phone rang, the air in the room seemed to disappear, replaced by an oppressive tension that made his skin feel like it was prickling. I tried everything. He blocked the unknown number, but the messages still came. He installed a tracking app, but nothing was recorded. The network confirmed that no such messages were sent to his number. They hinted that he might have made a mistake, or that his phone had been hacked. He even tried a factory reset, wiping everything. Futile. Within a day, the messages continued, as if nothing had happened. Now, Alex is surrounded by 3 sources of terror: a mysterious attic with ghostly lights and invisible presences, portrait with haunting eyes and accompanying strange phenomena, and inexplicable messages that invade even his most secret thoughts. Are they related, or are you simply going crazy in the isolation of this house? He tried to contact the homeowner again, his voice shaking as he asked about the attic, about the symbols, about the strange things that were happening. But that man brushed it off, his voice somewhat annoyed but containing an undisguised fear. "I told you, leave the attic alone," he almost shouted over the phone. "The house has a few quirks, but nothing dangerous as long as you don't mess with it." When Alex begged him to come check, he just repeated his warning and then abruptly hung up. Anger and frustration welled up in Alex, but he also sensed genuine fear in his host's voice. He knows something. He was also afraid of that attic. That was the turning point. Alex couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the confusion, the feeling of being watched from all sides, from the eyes in the painting, from the darkness in the attic, from the phone ringing in the night, were consuming him. He felt that if he continued to live in this suffocating fear without facing it, he would really go crazy. That afternoon, with a reckless courage fueled by desperation, Alex gathered a crowbar and a hammer. He stood under the attic door, his heart pounding as if it wanted to jump out of his chest. The nails holding the door together were old and rusty, so it didn't take much effort to pry them open. One by one, they squealed as they were pulled from the grain of the wood, the sound echoing throughout the silent hallway. Sweat made his hands slippery. Finally, with a final creak, the door opened. Alex shined his flashlight inside. A stagnant air, heavy with the smell of dust and the strong smell of burning candle wax, rushed out. The attic is low and cramped. Dense dust particles danced in the flashlight beam, swirling like tiny ghosts. He crouched, holding his breath, carefully stepping over the rickety floorboards. The space was almost empty, with only a few piles of old, yellowed newspapers stacked on top of each other and a few rotten cardboard boxes thrown in the corner of the wall. And then, in the middle of the attic, he saw it. A small circle of mostly melted candles, candle wax dripping, solidified on the wooden floor. Each candle is carefully arranged around a crude carving on the floor. It matched perfectly with the strange symbols he had seen in the warehouse. His stomach churned, a wave of nausea rolling in his throat. His hands shook so much that he almost dropped the flashlight. At that moment, a floorboard behind him creaked. Alex spun around suddenly, so fast that he almost lost his balance. There was no one there, but the pressure in the attic seemed to increase exponentially, weighing heavily on his lungs, making it difficult for him to breathe. His body was drenched in cold sweat. He could feel it, the invisible presence, defying all logic, now almost tangible. It was pressing on him from all sides, a suffocating, hostile feeling. His legs trembled, and a wave of panic rose so strongly that he found himself stumbling back toward the attic door. He almost slipped and fell down the stairs, slammed the attic door behind him and rushed out of the house, running into the weak light of late afternoon. He stood on the grass, panting, his heart beating wildly, his body still shaking. He looked back at the house, up at the dark attic window, and a deep terror came over him. Alex wished he could say his ordeal ended there, but the truth is, fear is too deeply rooted. He never spent another night under that roof again. That same evening, he packed up his most necessary items and drove to a motel in a neighboring town. The next day, he called the landlord and announced that he would move out immediately, accepting the loss of his deposit. The homeowner did not ask any questions. His voice over the phone sounded almost relieved, as if he too understood the weight of the secret that place held. Alex rented a short-term apartment and began moving his belongings. He never went back to the warehouse to get the flashlight. He also left behind that ghostly portrait, probably still leaning against a dusty corner somewhere in the garage of the old house, its black eyes forever looking into the darkness. Many months have passed since that day. Alex tried to rebuild his life in a new place, but the ghosts of that house, of the attic, of the portrait, and of the mysterious messages never truly left him. Even now, sitting in his new, safer living space, memories of those last moments in the attic still made his heart pound and his mouth dry. He still saw strange symbols flashing behind his eyelids every time he closed them. Sometimes, late at night, he smelled the faint scent of burning candle wax in the air, and his skin would get goosebumps as he remembered the oppressive darkness, the invisible presence that weighed him down. He has gradually accepted that there are mysteries in this world that we can never understand. The reason behind the sealed door in the attic, the meaning of the symbols, the origin of the portrait, or the identity of the sender of those horrifying messages, all will probably remain forever out of reach, locked in the realm of the inexplicable. Perhaps those symbols were talismans to ward off something evil, or perhaps they are what invite some dark force. All Alex knew for sure was that the fear that had sprouted and grown strong within those walls had never truly gone away. It followed him like a shadow, lurking in the hidden corners of his mind, like shadows stretching in the sunset. Sometimes he wondered what would happen if he stayed, if he forced himself to face that lurking presence. But then he shivered again. He suspected that he had made the only choice possible. There are some places that are best left alone. There are some doors that should never be opened. He would never forget that last glimpse into the attic, the faint impression of flickering candlelight dancing among the dust, and that silent, haunting presence weighing on him like a living thing. Even now, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was never truly alone in that house. Something ancient, restless, and evil had laid claim to that dark space long before he arrived, and it would remain there long after he was gone. And sometimes, just sometimes, at around 3 a.m., when the night is at its quietest, Alex still wakes up with a start. He took the phone, his heart pounding, half in anticipation, half in terror that the screen would light up again with a text from unknown. So far, that hasn't happened. But the fear remained, a constant reminder of the darkness he had once touched, and of the way that darkness had, in some way, also touched him. It all started not with a loud noise or a scary image, but with a feeling, a subtle, elusive feeling, as if someone was flipping through the pages of my own book of memories, pages that I had long tried to seal and hide, embarrassing moments from my childhood, small nameless worries, private shames that I thought only I knew about. They suddenly appeared, not as natural flashbacks, but as forced movies played in my mind. And with those uninvited memories comes the feeling of being observed. It was nowhere in particular, just lurking right at the edge of vision, a blind spot in perception but with a disturbingly clear presence. A silent, unblinking presence, like a patient hunter waiting for his prey to let their guard down. I feel it when I'm at work, when I'm walking on a crowded street, and the scariest thing is when I'm alone in my small, stuffy apartment. Sleep becomes a struggle. I fell into weary dreams, where those embarrassing memories twisted into strange shapes, distorted faces whispering accusations. And then, right before I was completely submerged, that feeling of being watched crept back into my dream. I felt that presence coming closer, very close, as if just a breath away from me. My body would jerk awake, my heart beating wildly in my chest, and cold sweat would soak the bedsheets. But every time I wake up, it only brings me back to the same scene. The gloomy bedroom, engulfed in complete darkness, with only the weak streetlight from outside casting dim streaks of light on the wall. There was no one there. There was never anyone there. Only the sound of my own pounding heart echoed in the eerie silence. In the morning, the reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed almost foreign. Sunken eyes, dark circles around the eyes due to lack of sleep, pale and stressed skin. I try to start my day as usual, make coffee, read the news, get ready for work. But everything goes awry. The morning sunlight, which originally brought feelings of warmth and hope, now seemed sterile and cold, like the lights in an operating room. The faces of strangers on the street seemed to harbor an underlying hostility, their fleeting glances lasting a little longer than usual, digging disturbingly deep into my mind. Paranoia began to take root, clinging tightly to me like a second layer of skin, sticky and uncomfortable. My neck was always tense, as if I was constantly preparing for a sudden touch from behind, a cold hand about to be placed on my shoulder. I avoided quiet spaces, but even the noise of the city couldn't drown out the nagging feeling of being watched. Then the messages started appearing. The phone, an inseparable object in the modern world, suddenly became the source of a new horror. They came from an unknown number, with no sender's name, only a short, cold content. The first message popped up while I was standing in the checkout line at my local grocery store. There's no hiding. Row number 3, next to the cereal counter. The blood in my veins seemed to freeze. I looked around, my heart pounding. Who can know exactly where I am and what I'm doing? I hastily paid, quickly walked out of the store, trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. The second message came when I was sitting alone in a familiar coffee shop, trying to calm myself with a hot latte. That cup of coffee won't help. The table is next to the window, overlooking the main street. Fear tightened its grip on my chest. I jumped up, spilled the entire cup of coffee. My panicked eyes scanned the shop. No one seemed suspicious, just strange faces looking at me with curiosity or discomfort. I rushed out of the shop, feeling like the air was thickening around me. The third, and perhaps scariest, message came while I was in a public restroom at a mall, trying to splash cold water on my face to fight off the mounting panic. The mirror doesn't lie. There's fear on your face. I let out a choked scream, backing away from the mirror, my reflection now looking like a panicked stranger. How could it know my every move with such terrifying accuracy? How does it know even my deepest thoughts and feelings? I started to have doubts. This presence, which is terrorizing me, is probably not human. No human being could track my every movement so perfectly, penetrating walls, seeing into even the most private spaces. Am I being followed by something else? An entity that exists between the cracks of reality, a digital ghost, or something much older and darker? That question haunted me, gnawing at my mind day and night. Fear was no longer just a vague feeling. It had become a cold certainty. I'm not safe anywhere. That night, I decided I couldn't continue living in such fear. I have to face it, whatever it is. I can't run away forever, because clearly, wherever I go, it will find me. The only way is to stand back and challenge. I turned off all the lights in the apartment, except for a weak yellow light in the kitchen. I sat down on an old wooden chair, placed my hands on the table, trying to control my rapid breathing. The dimly lit kitchen became my reluctant arena. I closed my eyes, focused all my thoughts, directing them towards the invisible entity observing me. I thought about my challenge. I thought about my refusal to be terrorized any further. I thought about my desire to face it head-on, to see its true form, if it truly existed. I sent a silent message into the darkness. I know you're there. What do you want? Show yourself. Time passes heavily. Every second seemed to last forever. The air in the kitchen seemed so thick and still that I could hear the sound of blood rushing in my ears. My heart pounded against my chest, as if it wanted to jump out and run away from me. A few minutes before 3 a.m., the ghostly hour according to folk beliefs, I felt a distinct change. The air became colder, and there was an invisible pressure weighing on my ears. The single kitchen light began to flicker erratically. The light dimmed and dimmed, creating strange dancing shadows on the wall. Then, my phone, lying face down on the table, suddenly vibrated. Its dry, sudden sound in the quiet space made me jump. Trembling, I turned it over. A new message from an unknown number. You will never be alone. Every hair on my body stood up. A cold stream of air ran down my spine. Primal terror welled up in his chest. But this time, instead of running away in panic or turning off the computer, I clenched my hands on the edge of the table. My arms trembled uncontrollably. My teeth clenched together. My breathing became ragged and ragged. No, I whispered through gritted teeth, my voice hoarse with fear but also filled with defiance. I'm not afraid. I won't leave here. I refused to leave my chair, even when the kitchen light dimmed strangely, almost completely out, leaving only a faint glimmer of light. The darkness became thicker, swallowing the corners of the kitchen, turning familiar objects into strange, terrifying shapes. Then I heard it. An almost imperceptible noise came from behind me, right near the old refrigerator. It was like the faint creak of a rusted hinge or a suppressed wheezing, or perhaps just the lightest touch of something on a cold tiled floor. Goosebumps spread all over the body. In my peripheral vision, right at the edge of my awareness, I saw something. A dark figure, shapeless, dim and wavering, stood next to the refrigerator. It had no clear outlines, like a smear of ink in the air, a void darker than the surrounding darkness. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of here immediately. The survival instinct screamed inside me. But something else, a desperate stubbornness, held me back. I forced myself to take a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. Then, slowly, extremely slowly, I stood up and turned around to face it. The shape seemed to ripple, to vibrate slightly, as if it were struggling to maintain a presence in this reality, or as if reality itself was trying to deny it. It had no eyes, no mouth, no features, but I could feel its attention on me. A cold, emotionless attention. My throat is as dry as the desert. My vision began to blur at the edges, overloaded by the raw intensity of the terror that enveloped me. But I don't back down. I took an uncertain step forward, the floor cold under my bare feet. Then another step. Cold sweat flowed down my spine. As I got closer, the shape began to disappear. It didn't retreat, but seemed to be being sucked back into the darkness around it, like ink dissolving into water. It gradually thinned, faded, until it completely disappeared into the dark space next to the refrigerator. Immediately, the single light on the kitchen ceiling turned back on at full brightness, the cold white light dispelling all darkness, revealing a terrifyingly normal, empty kitchen. There's nothing there. My phone vibrated again, this time with a short beep. I almost dropped it when I picked it up. New message. So close, yet so far away. My chest tightened. I realized I was panting, almost sobbing. My strength left me. I slammed the phone face down on the table, my body shaking uncontrollably. Hot tears of frustration, fear, and extreme helplessness began to sting my eyes. I faced it, but I don't understand any better. It came, it made its presence known to me, and then it retreated back into the darkness, leaving me with even greater fear than before. The days that followed were a fog of anxiety and exhaustion. I tried to change my habits, hoping that the unpredictability would sever the invisible bond between me and my stalker. I avoided going home right after work. I wandered aimlessly through the crowded, well-lit streets at night, trying to blend in with the crowd, finding safety in anonymity. I resist the urge to constantly check my phone, even though the itch to know if there are any new messages is almost unbearable. But changing habits has no effect. One night, after walking for hours through different districts of the city, I returned home just before dawn, exhausted and despondent. And of course, there was a message waiting for me. Street lights can't stop me. You know that. That text message was like a final blow, pushing me into a spiral of despair. My sleep was almost non-existent, just short naps, interrupted by panic attacks whenever I heard the slightest noise. The floor creaking, the wind whistling through the door, the refrigerator whirring. My appetite disappeared completely. Every time I tried to swallow something, I felt nauseous, my stomach churning with anxiety. I lost weight quickly, my body became thin and weak. And then, the tone of the messages began to change. They became less taunting, but more insistent, more urgent. Sometimes they seemed like strange requests, sometimes like incomprehensible orders. They talk about blurring boundaries, about the gap between dreams and waking reality, about cracks that something is trying to squeeze through. You must see. Don't resist connection. The boundary is thinning. Let me in. I couldn't fully understand their meaning, but each new message instilled a deeper sense of unease, as if they were slowly eroding the last defenses of my mind, preparing for some hidden force to invade, devour, or completely obscure my consciousness. I felt like I was on the brink of madness, or perhaps another much more terrible reality. Desperately searching for a way out, even if only temporary, I had an idea. Perhaps complete isolation, separation from the city, from technology, from other people can break this bond. I remember an old wooden house deep in the forest that I rented a few years ago to find tranquility. It's located hours away from the city, near a dense forest, where there are no street lights, no neighbors, just the pristine silence of nature. I thought, maybe there, in the silence of the green forest, I could find a little peace. Perhaps isolation from the wild will sever this ghostly connection. The trip to the cabin felt like a real escape, as the car rolled out of the noisy city, leaving behind neon lights and hustle and bustle of people. A small part of hope began to rekindle within me. The deeper I went into the countryside, the fresher the air became, and the tension in my body seemed to lessen a bit. Finally, I reached the wooden house when it was already dark. It is nestled between rows of ancient trees, looking small and lonely under the starry sky. There were no lights other than the silver moonlight and the weak headlights from my car. The silence here is different from the oppressive silence in the city apartment. It is alive, filled with the rustling of leaves, the distant cries of nocturnal creatures, and the whisper of the wind through the towering pines. For the first few hours, my phone was completely silent. No messages. There is no vibration. A cautious sense of relief began to creep into my mind. Maybe I was right. Perhaps this distance really helps. I found a space to breathe, a rare moment of peace after a long day of living in fear. Although the darkness that enveloped the forest seemed ominous, it was much more comforting than feeling claustrophobic, watched, in your own apartment. I sat on the porch of the rickety wooden house, breathing the fresh air of the night forest, listening to the surrounding natural symphony. I almost began to believe that I had truly escaped, that the nightmare was finally over. But then, the phone in my coat pocket vibrated violently. That sound, in the absolute silence of the forest, was like a gunshot in my ears. A chill ran down my spine, extinguishing any hope I had just rekindled. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, displaying a new message from an unknown number that was terrifyingly familiar. It reads, "Do you finally see it? There's nowhere left to run." My chest tightened as if being strangled by an invisible hand. My lungs felt congested. I couldn't breathe. It felt as if I had just been submerged in icy water. Hope shattered into pieces. There is no way out. No matter where I go, no matter what remote place I run to, it still finds me. Still there, waiting. I looked up into the thick darkness outside the wooden house. Moonlight paints strange, ghostly patterns on tree trunks and the ground. Every rustling of leaves, every dry twig cracking under the feet of some night animal, is now amplified into a potential threat. The fear returned, stronger than ever, because I now knew for certain that there was no way to permanently rid myself of whatever was haunting me. And that's when I realized, the only way left is not to run away, but to confront. Once again, but this time not with angry defiance, but perhaps with reluctant acceptance. I walked into the wooden house and placed the phone on the rickety wooden table. I forced myself to sit down in an old chair, facing the window overlooking the dark forest. And I wait. My whole body trembled with fear. Breathing is rapid and uneven. Each heartbeat is like a hammer hitting my chest. I don't know what I'm waiting for. A figure appearing outside the window, a strange noise in the house, or a new message. The waiting is scarier than the fear itself. Time passed slowly. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing happened. There was only the silence of the forest and the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, the phone on the table suddenly flickered to life. But this time it wasn't a text message. Its screen turned on for no apparent reason, displaying nothing, only emitting a strange, steady white light, illuminating the wooden walls of the cabin, creating a spooky atmosphere. I stared at it, my eyes wide open, not daring to blink. My heart seemed to stop beating. And in that moment of primal terror, a strange, almost unnatural calmness washed over me. A thought flashed in my head, a sudden, fundamental understanding. Maybe those messages weren't just threats. Perhaps they were a twisted form of beckoning, a strange way to force me to acknowledge a reality I had tried to deny at all costs. Maybe it doesn't want to harm me in the usual way. Perhaps it wants something else, recognition, connection, or perhaps surrender. I don't know what prompted me, but I reached for my glowing phone. The screen is still blank, no virtual keyboard or anything. But somehow I knew I could answer. I concentrated my thoughts, visualizing the letters. I typed a single reply, a simple acknowledgement, although I had no reason to believe it would be sent or received. I see you. My finger hovered over an imaginary point corresponding to the send button. For a split second, everything seemed to stop. My breathing, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, the sound of the wind outside. Then, I sent that message into the infinite void of the white screen. Immediately, the phone screen went dark. The wooden house was plunged into almost absolute darkness, with only weak moonlight shining in. A few seconds passed in a silence as heavy as the grave. My body was tense in a state of anticipation, not knowing what was about to happen. Then the phone vibrated once, a gentle vibration but enough to make me startled and almost drop it. I trembled as I looked at the dark screen. A line of white text appeared, the last message from an unknown number. "We are never apart." The moment those words appeared, an indescribable, suffocating pressure filled the wooden house. It wasn't wind, it wasn't sound. It was like the air itself was thickening, pressing against me from all sides. My ears are ringing. My head was dizzy. I staggered to my feet, feeling like I was about to faint. My vision warped at the edges, as if something was pressing on my senses, trying to integrate into my thoughts, into my consciousness. My breathing became sporadic and labored. My heart pounded like thunder in my chest. Sweat poured out like a shower on his temples. I know I have to get out of here, out of this cramped space. Summoning every last bit of willpower I had left, I rushed towards the cabin door, my hands groping for the doorknob in the darkness. I yanked the door open, stumbling out into the cool night air of the forest. As soon as I stepped out of the doorway, the pressure began to ease, as if I had just emerged from deep water. I stood there, leaning against the wooden wall of the cabin, swallowing gulps of the fresh forest air, my legs shaking as if they might collapse at any moment. In the jacket pocket, the phone was silent. No more vibrating. No more new messages. A gentle breeze stirred the tree branches overhead. The cold light of the moon shone down on the clearing in front of the cabin, revealing nothing lurking, nothing pursuing. But I can't shake the nagging awareness that I'm not alone. That maybe, from now on, I will never be truly alone again. That presence, even though it no longer attacked me directly, seemed to have become a part of me, an invisible shadow attached to my soul. Before dawn, I packed up my meager belongings and left the cabin. The trip back to the city took place in a strange state, a mixture of inherent fear and a fragile, indescribable feeling of relief. There are no new messages sent. The phone lay silently in my pocket. As I drove into the city, the morning sunlight seemed harsh and unwelcoming, but at least it was real. An undeniable, tangible truth, completely different from the distorted reality I had just experienced in the deep forest. For a while afterward, the phone remained silent. No more anonymous text messages, no more location tracking. But I found myself constantly checking it, an unconditional reflex, half expecting, half dreading another cryptic message to appear on the screen. The paranoia did not completely disappear. It still lingers in my mind, a dull fear that any moment could bring that presence back, reminding me of the unbreakable bond. I don't dare claim that I have completely escaped what once haunted me. Perhaps no one can truly escape their own ghosts. I simply learned to live with stress, learned to function despite the uncertainty hovering over my head. I learned to accept that there are things beyond understanding, forces lurking in the darkness that we can never fully explain. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I still feel a flicker at the edge of my vision. Or sometimes, my phone's screen automatically lights up for a moment for no apparent reason. Each time, my heart rate skyrocketed, and my stomach churned with familiar anxiety. But so far, no new messages have appeared. Maybe it's done with me, or perhaps it's just waiting for the right moment to remind me that, as it says, we are truly never apart. Even now, as I tell this story, in this quiet room, I can't help but glance at the phone lying face down on the table. The memories of those messages, of the feeling of being watched, of the shadowy figure in the kitchen, of the heavy pressure in the wooden house. They are still there, lingering like a suffocating breath on the back of my neck. Even though the screen remained dark and silent, I couldn't help but wonder, will a sudden ringing disrupt this quiet? Will a new message appear, forcing me to face once again the haunting question? What is real, and what is so deeply rooted in my mind that it is impossible to distinguish? And if that bell rings, if that text appears, I know one thing for sure. I will be right back in the middle of that familiar nightmare. My heart was pounding, my skin was cold and sweaty, and I was clearly aware that, no matter how hard I tried, it would never let me go.